Apple can be credited with being the pioneer of smartphones, but does this latest model have what it takes to keep it at the top of the game? Let's find out when we review the iPhone 6s. Let me first start off by saying how wicked fast this device is in every measurable action. There's a brand new A9 processor, and for the first time ever, there's 2 gigs of RAM on an iPhone. Not that last year's model was any slouch, but the 6s just blows it out of the water. From opening apps, to going between apps, to playing games, and unlocking the device, everything is completely seamless. Now, speaking of unlocking the device, there's a brand new fingerprint reader in this year's model, and it's easier to use than ever, but it may be a little too fast. The lock screen has become completely unusable, and in order to get into the camera, you're going to have to use the side button. Now, on the subject of processors, I've seen a lot of comparisons between Apple's latest A9 chip and other top-tier chips like the Snapdragon 810 or Exynos 7420, where the single core score on the A9 is higher, but the multi-score isn't as high as their counterpart. Now, why is that, and what does it mean? And let's say you have a basketball game and one team is comprised of Michael Jordan and LeBron James. The other team is the Golden State Warriors. If they're playing a game against each other, the Warriors will win because there's more of them and they work together as a team. But you know MJ and the King are just going to light you up and score quite a bit as well. You just can't really match the way a team plays together. What does this actually mean in terms of everyday performance? Well, really nothing. Apple's processors are so good now that you really don't notice the lack of performance from the lack of CPU cores. They've done more with 2 than most can do with 6 or 8. And now that there's the 2 gigs of RAM in the 6s, this thing is a complete beast. In a world full of giants, this is David at his finest. The design of this phone is identical to last year's model. However, it's grown in every dimension. Width, height, thickness, and weight has all increased. It's still sporting the same 4.7-inch Retina LCD screen with 326 pixels per inch. The more I use this phone, the less I notice the lack of pixel density. I'm coming from the Galaxy S6 as my daily driver, so I'm really used to pixel-dense Quad HD screens with lots of saturation, but I'm completely content with this phone, which is barely at 720p. As I mentioned, it weighs 143 grams, but it's slightly heavier than last year's. You could definitely feel the difference. It doesn't feel heavy, it just feels heavier. This year Apple introduced a new color called rose gold. Some say it's more of a pink, and that can be true, but depending on the light it can also look sort of copperish. So it has a really nice effect, and it's a really unique look. And it's a shame if anybody puts any kind of case on this phone, because you'll be covering it up, and how else will you notice that you're rocking the 6s? It fits really well in the hand, but it's a bit slippery when completely naked. See, I've become more of a phablet user in the recent few years, but this phone reminds me of why something with a smaller form factor is more practical for the average person. My hands are pretty normal, and I'm able to reach most parts of the screen without having to use the reachability feature. Even though the design of this device is a year old, it's really held up to the test of time. Other manufacturers provide their customers with yearly redesigns, but Apple designs are in a two-year factor. Beautiful craftsmanship and entirely new internals is what Apple provides its fans to keep these phones new and their fans happy. Now, this may sound a little bit odd, but I really enjoy the vibrator on this phone. Once again, it has this really precise feeling, and if I can describe it, it's like if somebody took a pinball machine and pulled the lever all the way back, so it's really one strong shock. My daughter's toy to demonstrate. That's what the new vibrator feels like. Most vibrators on phones feel like that. The buttons feel really good. They have this nice clicky feedback. They're nice and tactile, and they're well placed for the average hand. Apple is again keeping its trademark button this year, home button this year. And I heard rumors that they may do away with this in the next generation. But I doubt that they'll want to use or remove this fingerprint scanner. So it probably is not true. The speaker sounds really good also. It's not front firing, but it's only one speaker. And it's placed at the bottom, so it has some pretty good sounds. Although I'm not a huge fan of iOS, I've really come to appreciate it for its ease of use. If you give a kid an iPhone, you'll see just how short of a learning curve there is for this operating system. Some things I really enjoy about the new iOS 9 is the QuickType text selector. The way that works is if you hold down on the keyboard, you're able to move the cursor back and forth. So you can enter in text in a different location. Another thing I really like about the new iOS 9 is the way they implemented the back button. And the way that works is, let's say you're in this Notes app. You get a notification and go to Gmail. Well, now I'm presented with this back button in the top left corner, so that when I click it, I can go back to the Notes application. The reason why I like this is because it saves you from having to use the app launcher. Now, speaking of the app launcher, I think it's by far the worst I've ever used. There's no way to close all the apps at all the time. I mean, all the apps at once. And the way it overlaps, it just makes it hard to see each screen. I'd really like to see them go back to the one from iOS 7 or 8, because I think that was one of the best app launchers or app switchers I've ever seen. This year, Apple finally upgraded its camera optics to 12 megapixels, which finally brings 4K video to the iPhone. An overall megapixel count may be lacking behind its Android counterparts, but we have to remember that the actual size of megapixels on Apple's iSight cameras are a bit larger and bring in more light than a lot of other smartphones in the market nowadays. Digital image stabilization is the only form found on this particular phone, while the 6S Plus receives true optical image stabilization. Now, with the quality of cell phone cameras continuing to increase at an alarming rate, it seems like we're starting to expect them to perform at a DSLR level. It's really amazing what some of these phones can do nowadays, but I feel like Apple is starting to fall behind its competition. The lack of megapixels was finally addressed, and the photos look great, as iPhone always do. But while something like the LG V10 and the Samsung Note 5 had me not carrying a DSLR anymore, the iPhone photos just seem like a really good point and shoot. When I try to get macro shots, I can't get up and close with the subject as I can from other phones. I think it's on par with photos that I took with the Note 4 from last year. And this isn't a bad thing, it's just no longer the king of smartphones. It's more like a duke or a lord. Now, another feature I wanted to talk about was 3D Touch. I find this feature completely addicting, and I find myself using it just for the heck of it. Now, it's almost as addicting as clicking a pin. When I first heard about this feature, I thought it was a complete gimmick. It sounded just as useless as Samsung's AirView. You guys remember that? After using it for some time, I completely get it. I'm sure you've heard a million explanations of it, but let me leave you with another one. Imagine yourself 20 years ago. If you're using your old Apple IIe with the one-button mouse, you're presented with a new mouse with 2 buttons. Someone says, "Here, try this mouse with 2 buttons." Your initial reaction is, why? Why change what's already working well? You reluctantly try it, and it just blows your mind. It solves issues you never realized you had, and it's hard to go back to life without it. Now, this feature is still in its infancy, but I can't wait to see what software companies do with it in the future, as it has so much potential. One way I use it is especially in the Instagram or Photos apps, because it's just so easy to just do the whole peek and pop. Yes, I'm showing off some of my photography. Don't mind me. Another thing I'd like to discuss with this phone is the battery life. I have to say it actually just blows my mind. It's amazing. I didn't use the 6S, or I didn't use the 6 from last year. I had a 6S, so I can't really compare one to the other. But I can say for a battery this small, this thing is just amazing. It lasted all day without a charge, and the standby time is actually really good also. So when I used it all day, I went to sleep and it was about 22%. I left it unplugged, and when I woke up it was still at 20. Now this is really good because the battery is smaller than the previous model. Apple just found a way to optimize the operating system so it just sips battery. Now there's 3 letters that I want to bring up. FOH. Now if you don't know what FOH means, go ahead and go to Urban Dictionary, go look it up. I'll pause for a second. Okay, and we're back. Now, Apple definitely has a couple FOH features, and I'd be doing you guys a disservice if I didn't discuss some. First and foremost, the 16 gigs. In a world with 4K video, apps taking 1 to 2 gigs, and live video, Apple is still asking people to fork over several $100s for a 16 gigabyte hard drive option. FOH with that, son. Now, cloud storage is definitely helpful, but this hard drive option needed to go away a couple years ago. Also, live photos. Try as I may, I just don't get it. If I wanted to take a small video with sound, I would take a small video with sound. I find the feature to just be a complete gimmick, and I just don't know why you need Force Touch in order to use it. Now, last but not least for FOH, the home screen grid. After 9 generations of iPhones, we're still given this same 4-column boring home screen grid. I don't know why after so long we don't have a choice. You know, people have their individual tastes, and to be stuck within this 4-column iOS home screen, it's just crazy. FOH for real on that, son. FOH. Bottom line, if you're in the market for a new phone, this should definitely be in contention, and I highly recommend it. If you're thinking about upgrading your iPhone 6, well, go ahead and hold on to your money. You can make your current phone pink with the skin, and most if not all the features of the 6S can be had with jailbreak tweaks. Speaking of which, stay tuned for the next video because I'll be going over my top 10 favorite jailbreak tweaks that will completely enhance your user experience. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Peace. Oh, hey! Hey, do me a favor. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a ton, and I'll be able to bring you more awesome content like this. Thanks. LGLG.